You can think of the vaccine almost as medical reparations. It's the 40 acres and a mule, but of 2021. So we really should be giving this vaccine preferentially to people of color, I do believe.
Back in June, I talked with Dr. Stephen McDonald about why he was joining the Black Lives Matter protests.
Communities of color, immigrant communities, poor communities, these are the communities that are suffering the most from COVID-19. That was also Black death. That was also murder, but at the hands of the federal government. These communities aren't just randomly selected by COVID-19 to have higher mortality. It's because of high blood pressure, diabetes, various comorbidities that these communities are sicker. And until we address racism as a public health issue, these communities will continue to suffer.
We're here today to get his thoughts on the continuing racial disparities in the pandemic and why Black and brown communities are largely being left behind in the vaccine rollout. Hi.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Elbow bump? When we met last summer, you talked about the connections between the Black Lives Matter movement and the racial disparities in COVID deaths. That was 9 months ago. Do you think more people are making that connection now?
After the year of the biggest civil rights protests that the United States has ever seen, I wish I could tell you, yes, we're living in a totally different world. The reality is we're not. I mean, just look at the vaccine rollout. We're still having debates over how much can we protect the Black community at the expense of Americans at large. The COVID crisis is not just the virus. It's the other things around it that lead to it. So we need to be giving people homes. We need to be giving people employment. We need to be giving people health insurance and access to primary care. We need to be lifting people out of food deserts. There's all these other things that contribute to health that the government needs to be offering people that it's just not.
We're seeing across the country that Black and brown people are getting vaccinated at lower rates than white people. Why do you think there's this disparity?
The answer is twofold, I think. A lot of people will speak to Black hesitancy around the vaccine. I think that is partially true and also partially justified. Black people are routinely disenfranchised from so many systems of American society, so why would healthcare be any different? If you're suspicious of how you're getting a housing loan or the school your kids are going to, or the housing being offered you by the city, so why wouldn't you be skeptical of a vaccine offered to you, not only offered to you, fast-tracked by President Trump? The second part of this is that the vaccine rollout is not going as planned in Black communities because institutions, the government, does not want to prioritize Black people appropriately. So as long as it fails to do that, we're going to continue to see these same setbacks in vaccine administration.
It almost feels like a competition for a scarce resource, and a group of people with more time and more resources, a group that skews more white, are winning that competition.
I mean, a couple thoughts on that. One, you can think of the vaccine almost as medical reparations. It's the 40 acres and a mule, but of 2021. So we really should be giving this vaccine preferentially to people of color, I do believe. You know, it doesn't have to be a competition. If we were to appropriately tax people at the top, resources at the bottom might not be so scarce. And so, yes, some very affluent and very wealthy people who are mostly white will lose in this, but the vast majority of white people have a lot to gain. Is it unimaginable to think of a world where the Department of Health would go door to door in Black neighborhoods offering the vaccine? Like, that sounds maybe crazy, but is that what we should be doing?
So what do you think is the bigger problem here? Mistrust in the vaccine or inability to access it in the first place?
I don't have definitive data on that, but when you look at cities like Philadelphia or New York, where white people are being out vaccinated to Black people at rates of 5 to 1, I think it can't just be the population that's being resistant. It would be the same thing if you had asked me, well, why do you think Black people are dying at rates higher than white people? It's not anything that we're doing. It's the situations and conditions in which people of color are living.
What would you like to see for your patients?
In communities of color that largely rely on emergency rooms as their only touch with the medical system, I would love to be able to offer the vaccine to anyone who came through the door. That would mean a lot. So I'm seeing a significant amount of COVID now. The winter surge is really disheartening because when you look at it, you can see the clear upticks after Thanksgiving and after Christmas. And now I think it's falling in large part because there's no January holiday or February holiday. And so there's no reason to gather. People are generally inside. And what that means on some level is that anyone who was aware that communities of color are perishing at higher rates ultimately didn't care when going to Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner. And that's really upsetting. There seems to be a fundamental callousness in American culture that allows us to not think about one another. And it's flaming the COVID-19 pandemic.